so they can arrest you, they can detain you, they can handcuff you, they can put you in a prison cell, and then let you go without any charges and get away with it. That's kidnapping. That's arbitrary policing and kidnapping. No different from what they do in China or what they do in Russia. No different. Except here people think we live in a democracy, and there at least people know they don't live in a democracy.
In China they'll execute you as well.
What?
In China they'll execute you as well.
They execute people in America.
No, they don't.
So what are you on about?
I've never seen America.
They don't execute you. Have you heard of anybody being executed in China for protesting against lockdowns? No, you haven't. No, you haven't. So what you're saying is execution is on the... No, they don't just disappear. Execution is on the statute book in China. Yes, it is. Do I agree with that? No, I don't. Executions on the statute book in many countries, my friend, including the United States of America.
So you're putting China on a par with the United States of America?
Of course.
That sounds really...
Hang on. The gentleman here says, I'm putting China on a par with the United States. I'm comparing and contrasting, my friend. What's the matter with that? How are you ever supposed to understand the world unless you're able to compare and contrast between systems? The gentleman here.
When the Tories have shafted this country into non-existence after 13 years, they'll have an election in the Labour Party, which is exactly the same fucking party.
Or worse.
It will take over, and it's Team B takes over. We're living in a one-party system here, whether we like it or not. They're all the same.
The gentleman here pointed out the role of BlackRock. Of course, it's not just BlackRock. There are about 150 companies in the world that control the majority of the world economy. They dominate the key sectors at the very top, what you call the commanding heights. Commanding heights is an analogy, a military analogy. It means you go to the top of a mountain, and from the top of a mountain you have a fort, and with that fort you've got a couple of machine guns, and you can protect that top of the mountain by using a couple of machine guns and 2 gunners against thousands of people. And so that's where the idea of commanding heights come from. So what does it mean? If the commanding heights of the economy, the largest 150 companies in the world, are owned by private capital and not by the ordinary person, they're owned by a tiny elite of representatives in the world who are dominated by BlackRock and Vanguard, who dominate the entire planet.
So they're just the business arm of the Bank for International Settlements.
Well, they're
above them.
Well, they are. You see, you mustn't make the mistake, in my opinion, of simply saying, "Oh, it's this group or that group alone."
Oh no.
You could go into a room full of every executive of Vanguard and BlackRock, machine gun them all down, and the next day the system would repeat itself through another phase. So it's not about the individuals who control. That's why some of them come out and say, oh, what we did was wrong. And that's why you have Democrat, Republican, Labour and Tory, Liberal and German Social Democrat, German Christian Democrat. They can move between each other. Of course, when people upset the cart, and occasionally 1 or 2 of them do, at the moment in America, for example, the whole game has been upset, hasn't it? You've got Donald Trump on the one side, who's claiming to represent the ordinary people, and to be fair to him, during his period in office, he did speak out at least against some of the deep state operations of the system.
War.
Sorry?
He started no war.
And he didn't start any war. That's also true. That doesn't mean he didn't drain it, because he's surrounded, and he himself is a billionaire. He's surrounded by other billionaires, and he's surrounded by the state machine and the big capitalists who he actually represents, despite his rhetoric about defending the interests of the working class and the middle class. On the other side, you've got the Democratic Party, you've got Robert Kennedy Jr., who's turning around and speaking out against the tyranny imposed in the name of coronavirus. And he knows from the inside the way the system works. He comes from a legal background, if you like, a lawyer challenging the way things have operated over many decades in the United States. He seems to be an honest John, standing up against the authorities. But the idea that he on his own, if he were elected President of the United States, if he were getting anywhere near being elected first of all, as he himself has said, he'll be assassinated. And if he was to be elected, then of course he's also surrounded by an entire army of officials and big businesses who actually shape and control the agenda in society. So he might clean out one arm only to be encircled, surrounded and strangled by another arm. So you see, it's never about the individual, although individuals play a role in shaping the trajectory and direction at one time or another. It's not actually about the individuals. It is a systemic question which requires the organisation of the people from below to challenge the entire apparatus of power. That's the only real way you can bring about change. Pavel. Would you mind just a wee bit? Sorry.
Hello?
Just a little bit further. It's hard to concentrate there when you're talking.
Look, see, you look at what happened at National Factory. The Tsar, under extreme pressure, the temporary thing. So you couldn't just go by a...
You're correct. For example, in 1905, as you point out, the Tsar in Russia established forums for debate. And these forums for debate were established by the establishment, by the secret police, by the agents of the state. Was his name of Father Gapon, was an agent of the Tsarist police. They called for these meetings, and when people attended these meetings, they began to raise their criticism. And these meetings then turned into what later was called Workers' and Soldiers' Soviets. Organs of the people to democratically discuss how the society should be run.
I'll be just over there when you're ready.
Okay. How the society should be run. Now, these organisations had emerged from official society as a means of controlling that society, but then went out of control. Now, if you look at the lockdowns in China, very interesting phenomena. The lockdowns in China, when they were imposed by what's called residence committees. Now, residence committees are the lowest level of the state in China. In a local community, they have what's called grid administration. About 3,000 households are in these grids. So when I was living in China many years ago, when you left the compound I lived in, there used to be like...
For most. Like 300 families, one committee for most.
Grid system I'm talking about. Not the residence committee. Residence committee slightly smaller numbers, but up to 1,000 actually.
All right.
But the grid system was established later to control a slightly larger area.
Okay.
But within that, you've got residence committees elected by the people, but also appointed by officials. But they aren't all party officials. They deal with things like rubbish collection. They deal with things like family planning. They deal with things like arguments in the community, environmental pollution, checking up on people's healthcare, this type of thing. So it's like almost like a street level community organisation. So they were in charge of the lockdown. It wasn't the army and police. It was the local community. And then people volunteered. They said, okay, we need to protect against COVID. So they put on these white suits and then sat down at the gates, checking people's temperature, making sure food was delivered and so on. They weren't a tyrannical dictatorship, although it looked like that. They then tried to do these apps. You know, you have an app. You declare green code, yellow code, red code. If you've got a temperature, red code. Green code, no temperature. Then you can go out. If you've got a negative test, green code, you can go out, go shopping. So it was like that type of thing. They tried using the theory dominating the world, they tried to control COVID. And some people say, oh, they did for 2 years. They succeeded. But the problem was this.
Until they stopped.
As soon as the mood,
It's
because
your
you got a
problem.
big housing block.
You didn't control it.
You got a big housing block.
Yeah, but as soon as it stopped, it
You
went
got a big
rampant.
housing block of 1,000 people living in a
built
block.
up immunity now.
You got
I hadn't.
a community with a gate around it,
All right.
with 3 blocks, all with
Different
1,000
ways
people in there.
to
As
the
soon
same
as
man.
those people in the housing block
Yeah,
decided
there
enough
should
We
have
is
made
been
enough,
it. We made it.
they've only
should
got
have been no
30
lockdowns.
people at the door
We made
downstairs.
it.
They're members of their
That's
own
the most
community.
simple thing.
So they
We
came
made
downstairs and they
it.
said
We
to
get
them,
through it.
we no longer want
We
to
always
abide
said
by
that
this.
COVID was a hoax.
Then the whole thing was finished.
Really? Oh.
That's why it ended. And so again, you've got this circumstance similar to what you described in the Russian Revolution, where the state established this control, the people went along with it, and then suddenly you had organs of democratic control.
It wasn't as prolific as they said it was. It was all scaremongering. It was only the percentage of deaths was so small. It was only the infirm and the old.
These are the dynamics. As you say, it's nice that you come to me and come to this meeting with knowledge from the past. How do you learn to act in society? Unless you have the knowledge of the past, you can apply it to the future. So that's the reason why studying these questions, studying what happened in China, studying what happened here, is the precondition for understanding how to intervene now and in the future. What else can you do? You can only learn lessons from struggles of the past to apply to struggles of the future. And to try and work out exactly what was going on, not just blanket cover, or every tyranny over there, nothing you can do. You have to be able to work out how people maneuver against existing apparatuses. Even, you know why, you talk about Russia. The leaders of the Russian Revolution, many of them spent time in prison. Many of the revolutionaries around the world spent time in prison.
Before the revolution.
And you know what they said before the revolution? Okay. Some of them after.
Yeah.
By the way, you know what they used to say? Prison is the school of revolution. Prison is the school of revolution.
Well, now it's the school of Islam.
Because if you're in a prison, well, one of the reasons why Islamic fundamentalists get a certain foothold in the prisons, the same reason why Irish revolutionaries gained a foothold in the prison, the same reason why Christian fundamentalists gain a hold of the prison,
captive
is
audience.
Because it's not only a captive audience, but the organizational regimen of prison life leads to a combination of solidarity imposed from above like an army on the people, so that you don't even need to say much to be able to know who your ally is and who your enemy is, and to be able to combine. And then you'll see even the tightest prisons in the world have rebellions and revolts. How's that possible? If human beings can just be controlled by surveillance, observation, cameras, alarms, locked doors, you discover even a prison, even the strongest prison, can be broken from the inside. A friend of mine was in prison with Nelson Mandela in the same prison cell, Nimrod Sajaki, in Robben Island. And when they went to prison, you know what they used to do when they were in prison? The prison guard would come to them and they used to say to them, the prison guard, say, I know why I'm in prison. I'm in prison accused of treason. Why are you in prison? That guy's 8 hours a day in prison. He's coming there for work. Actually, these prison guards began to be friends. They just worked on him day in, day out, day in, day out. And even when they brutalized them, they work on them again. I forgive you, you didn't mean to do that. You're forced, you're put under pressure, other people put you under pressure. And eventually they break it down. So you have to understand the apparatus of power. You have to analyze it, look at how it operates. And consider yourself like some people do, like you perhaps do. We are already in a prison or under a dictatorship. You've also got to consider, most people don't think that. So you've got to work on the basis, most of the population don't think they're in a prison. Most of the population think they're in a democracy. Some of you don't think that, as you say with a smirk, nonsense, right? Your own experience has led you to conclude the opposite. But for me, the important thing is to keep a sense of proportion, so that you don't isolate yourself totally from the rest of the population. You must be able to speak to those people who think they are living in a free democracy, who think that all the COVID decisions were right, who think that taking the jab was right, who think that restricting protests was. You must be able to constantly go back and talk to these people. And in that way, chink the armour in the same way as you would chink the armour of a prison guard who's watching over you in prison. And in that way, you can break even the strongest chains controlling humanity. And I think there is an automatic dynamic within the minds of humanity, the overwhelming majority of humanity, to challenge that power. And it's a global consciousness about what needs to be challenged. They don't, it's not obvious to them. It's not clear to most people what's wrong. But they know something is wrong with the way the restrictions and powers that they encounter. An example of that is this ULEZ campaign. You know, Sadiq Khan imposed these cameras. The cameras have got nothing to do with pollution. They are universal surveillance cameras. They don't record those cars that are high polluters. They record every car, right? And when they record every car, they trace where everyone goes all the time, right? That's what they're doing. They're not watching for the cars that are polluting. They're watching every car, so that they can impose controls on the movement of everybody.
Data harvesting.
Because they have obsessive consciousness about the expansion of terrain of their power. Data power, as you say. Google wanted to watch everything. When I first went on the internet, I was doing internet stuff long before Google even existed.
Yeah.
In the early 1990s, I was working on the internet.
Alpha Vista.
And Alta Vista, Netscape, and all the rest of it, and even on BBS systems. And you know, at that time I was thinking, well, then maybe they'd be able to like create systems to survey everywhere. Where now you can go on the thing, look everywhere on Earth. Within about 2 meters space, you can see satellite. What the intelligence agencies only knew in the 1990s. Every person on Earth can know this now. You could look at the corner of I've looked at the North Korean border. The houses there. I looked at every corner of the planet, right? You can look on there. You look at a little village hut in Lake Baikal in Russia. You can look on it on the internet right now. So you have access to information or knowledge, which they are accumulating all this to try and use it against you, but they don't really know how to make money out of it. And that's what their aim is. They want to constantly, they're all nudging each other out the way to make money. You think Moderna, BioNTech, Pfizer, and Johnson & Johnson are in it together? For a time they're in it together when we were throwing all the money their way. Now Moderna gets the money, Johnson & Johnson doesn't, Pfizer doesn't. Pfizer will be releasing data against Moderna. Johnson & Johnson will be releasing data against Pfizer. They'll all be fighting each other. So you also have to take advantage of their own internal contradictions and battles amongst themselves. Because that is also chinks in the armour that weaken their power over you.
Are they not all owned by BlackRock as well?
Well, they are.
Pepsi and Cola are owned by the same.
Yes, that's true. That's perfectly true. But BlackRock, as I said,
and I say BlackRock, I mean Vanguard, State
yes,
Street,
you
the
can
whole lot.
wander into the headquarters
and
of
they
the
all own each
largest
other.
financial entities in the world, shoot them all dead, and the system will still maintain itself. So it's not about an individual Larry Flint controlling the game.
Yeah.
It's about the way they operate. Firstly, to make money. Secondly, to exercise power. And that continues regardless of which individual company is at the top or not. BlackRock, apparently, they were condemned by The Guardian last week or the week before. Because, they're no longer abiding by net zero policies. Net zero policy, because people are opposing it. And I agree with those people who are taking down those cameras around London at the moment. And it may well be the case that enough people take down those cameras to make the system inoperable. And if it's inoperable in London, then of course people are getting scared. Maybe it's inoperable everywhere else as well. And so then they move to another system. Don't imagine that there's some surveillance system coming along, which is brand new. Although I said they're watching every car, they already know where you are with your mobile phone. Mm-hmm. Not only where you are, but what you're doing, what you're thinking. They know more about you than you know yourself. And they try and feed you stuff, and they can record. They can record what you're saying. They can turn the camera on when you don't even realise it. They can turn the camera on your computer. And so they already have this vast data sway. The problem is they don't know what to do with it. It's one thing to have masses of data, it's another thing to make money out of it. And so they're constantly angling to sell this information to this or that intelligence agency or this or that business. But of course, when you get down to it, if you go on the latest thing, ChatGPT, or the latest thing, artificial intelligence, you ask the artificial intelligence a couple of questions, it cannot answer the question. So what's the point? All this effort they've made to make this complex artificial intelligence, and it answers the question wrongly. What's the point? Not always, of course, but a lot of the time.
Yes, about this BRICS now going on, that's going against the dollar.
Yeah, well, I don't think that BRICS is going to be such a big thing as people imagine. The Chinese, of course, want to try and oust the dollar and push the Americans aside. Of course they want to do that. The problem is,